Let's continue the conversation now. My 5 tips for African Americans prompted strong reactions, even some outrage, some anger, some shock. Our next guest has 5 tips for white people to improve race relations or improve their conditions. So anti-racism activist and author Tim Wise joins us now from Nashville. Tim, man, I got a scathing email from you. Why were you so mad at me?
I wasn't mad at you, man. I just think that the words Bill O'Reilly didn't go far enough should never be uttered by anyone in this country, let alone you. But, you know, that was my beef.
Well, my thing is that there are many things that Bill O'Reilly and I disagree on, but this just happens to be one subject where we agree on a few things. And so, don't, as I said, don't shoot the messenger, attack the message. So, here, fix the message. So listen, you've been on this program. I was like, did Tim think this was the last conversation we were going to have about race? And you have been on this program 23 times since 2009, and that's the times that our booking department alerted you, not the times where I called you and personally asked you to be on this show. And we've had many conversations about race, about we've run the gamut. So this is it. So now let's have this conversation, since people were, you know, like, hey, you know, what about why don't you talk about what white people can do? You say stop dodging the issue by saying things like slavery was a long time ago. Get over it. Why?
Right. Well, that's the operative deflection, right? The idea that when we're talking about racism, we're automatically talking about the period of enslavement. But when black and brown folks are talking about racism, they're talking about what's going on now. They're talking about stop and frisk. They're talking about racial profiling, 2 million cases of housing discrimination a year now, even though we have fair housing laws. So I think when white folks do this, sort of like, well, that was a long time ago, it's inaccurate, it's disingenuous, and it's really sort of inconsistent because, frankly, we love the past when it makes us feel good. That's what July 4th is. That's what those fireworks are. The American Revolution happened a really long time ago. White folks aren't over that one yet. So it seems to me we ought to at least understand history does matter, and it continues into the present. Okay.
I know that this is your life's work, but I want to get through this. I only have a certain amount of time. I don't want to get through all 5 of them. You said, assume that people know their own lives better than you do. In other words, black folks aren't crazy when they say they get profiled. I had that argument, I'm sure you remember, with a conservative radio host recently. Go ahead.
Absolutely. That one's self-explanatory. Right.
Okay. All right, good. All right, stop saying you have a black friend as a get-out-of-racism-free card.
Right. I mean, the reality is, first of all, we say that we're oftentimes lying. We don't really. But more importantly, even if we have people of color in our lives, that would be like a straight man saying that he can't be sexist because he has a wife. Like, who would make that argument, right? Just because you have people who are close to you in a marginalized group doesn't mean that you don't carry any prejudice in the larger society. So that's not a get-out-of-racism-free card, and that's just not a legitimate response to the claim of racial bias.
Confront the long legacy of white denial when it comes to racism.
Yeah, this is a really big one. You know, the reality is I understand why white folks in 2013 might not see the problem, but what's really scary is that if you go back to 1962-63, when we were still an apartheid country, before civil rights laws had even been passed, between 2/3 and 90% of white Americans in Gallup polls at that time said that they thought black folks still had equal treatment in housing, employment, and schools. So I guess my challenge to white folks is, what does it say that even when racism was blatant, we didn't see the problem? And what does that mean for us now? If we didn't see it when it was blatant and we were wrong, and black and brown folks saw it and they were right, what makes us think that suddenly we've become really perceptive and they've lost their minds? That seems totally irrational to me.
Mm-hmm. Stop using statistics incorrectly to justify prejudice. And I think that one of those is talking about crime. We don't say white-on-white crime, but we say black-on-black crime. And then when you actually look at overall violent crime in the U.S. is coming down, it's still a crisis, especially in minority communities. It's still a crisis. People are still killing each other. But you said stop using statistics incorrectly.
What I mean by that is this, you know, people have tried to rationalize racial profiling and stop and frisk in New York, for instance, by talking about the disproportionate crime rate in black communities. But the reality is that data cannot be used to justify general suspicion of all black folks. In New York, for instance, out of the millions of stops that have been made, less than 5% of the time is even a citation given, let alone an arrest. Less than 2% do they find drugs. Less than 0.2% do they find weapons. So the reality that there's disproportionate crime in a certain community cannot be used to justify the kind of overgeneralization that racial profiling and stop and frisk have brought about in places like New York and around the country.
It was hard for you to cut it down to 5, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had like 80. So folks who want to find out more can check it out on the website, or they can